of the Social Vision Conference. We've been learning so much, and if you've tuned this in for one panel or for all of them, we really appreciate everyone coming and learning. So we have a really awesome panel coming up now. We only have 2 left for the whole Social Vision Conference. So I won't say too much about it right now because I'll pass it over to Binyamin to give that over. But please join us again at 3 for a talk by Joseph Telushkin, which is going to be awesome. So I'll pass it over to Binyamin, and yeah, I look forward to hearing this panel a lot.
Jonah, thank you so much. This panel is entitled The Theory and Application of the Rebbe's Social Philosophy with Professor Richard Sugarman. My name is Binyamin Murray. My wife and I are shluchim in Middlebury, Vermont, and I had the pleasure of being a student while I was at the University of Vermont, Professor Sugarman's. I first met him when I took a course entitled The Moral and Religious Perspectives of the Holocaust. He's been my teacher, mentor, and friend since then. And he and his wife first shared the beauty and mystique of Shabbos with me. And I'm grateful to the Sugarmans for their love and dedication. And I'm really thankful I merited this relationship. Professor Sugarman has been teaching religion and philosophy, at the University of Vermont for over 50 years. He's been studying, teaching, and writing on the philosophy of the Jewish French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas for over 40 years. He's the author of 4 books and numerous articles, including the newly released book, which I highly suggest you take a look at, Levinas and the Torah, a phenomenological approach from SUNY Press. We're going to have an open conversation here. We have some questions that are going to guide us. If anyone has any questions, you're welcome to put them into the Q&A or the chat, and I will bring them up as they're relevant to the discussion. And without further ado, Professor, I think we'll start. We've had a lot of conversations recently about the book, and I'm interested, and I'm wondering if you could share. There were 3 themes that kind of came up again and again as we were speaking. The theme of responsibility, or we could call it in Levinas's terms, the different threads of responsibility, of progressiveness. And these themes that you brought up through pointing to various parts of the Rebbe's work and scholarship in different parts of the book, you use a phrase, the Rebbe chose where to be radical. He chose in which areas that he could push the envelope, not in the form of observance, God forbid, but in the social realm. And I was wondering, since you've spent so much of your career studying Levinas, what do you think could be taken from your studies of Levinas to illuminate the Rebbe's social vision, both theoretically and practically?
That's a wonderful question, which I can't possibly answer, but to which I can begin to respond. I think that the Rebbe in particular, one of his most radical contributions was the democratization of Jewish education. I mean, he spoke not only to Torah scholars and rabbis, but also to people who had not too much background and some who had very little at all. And he tried, and the question arises to begin with, how did he orient them? Speaking to them together, for example, in the primary format he used of a Farbrengen, a Hasidic gathering. And one of the things that struck me, where I see a convergence between Levinas and the Rebbe, is on the subject of time. The Rebbe both had a very concrete view of the subject of time. The Rebbe, for example, in a Farbrengen, as those of us who were privileged to hear one or see one, remember, he almost always would start out by saying, today is. So today is the 19th day of Shvat. Then he would get more particular. We are just before Mincha, and it's Yom HaSheni of Parshas Yisro. And he would make it, and everybody kind of understood that. That kind of placed them in the same context. And if you go back and you take a look, a book you just recommended to me, I read a chapter of, what might be called the Rebbe's first book, although it's unusual, is the Yom Yom, written 1940. There were two versions, one from 40 to 41, I think, and one from 42 to 43, if I'm not mistaken. And what the author, Rosen, points out is how it is situated exclusively in Jewish time. What the Rebbe began to do in America was to resituate Jews within the Jewish week, something that was commonplace before all the upheavals and depredations of the 20th century in Europe, in Eastern Europe at least. Now, regarding his other innovations, for sure, he was very considered, and it was considered later to be very radical and not universally accepted by other Hasidic Rebbeim as well as other Rabbanim.
What particularly was, sorry to interject, what was particularly radical about his approach?
What was radical was opening Hasidut and even glimpses of the Kabbalah to women, and even in a way to children. And this was unheard of. And in a sense, Elliot Wolfson, in his book, The Open Secret, which I admire, but which is a little difficult, he put a tremendous amount of work into this. What was the open secret? The open secret was when the Baal Shem Tov said, when will Mashiach come, when your well springs overflow, right? Mm-hmm. Well, in a sense, what he's saying, the Rebbe turned a hidden esoteric vision into something that was an accessible reality proportional to people's understanding for everybody. And that was pretty radical. Not that he was revealing, secrets like the end of time and so on. I'm not sure that he ever spoke of that, or he did speak about the seventh generation and so on. Also, the Rebbe, just to go to the far end, had from the calendar and the week, he did have, there were many discussions and evocations of this, beginning with the previous Rebbe, of Zman Mashiach, Messianic times. And he did not believe that we had come to that time quite yet. And he believed we were on the cusp of it, as I understood it. And what was he then saying? What was he saying? Let me give you an example. I believe, in contrast to the philosophers, what we might call of finitude, who base time on death, like Sartre, like Heidegger, like Merleau-Ponty, all of whom he would have been familiar with in France when he studied there, and probably in Germany too, but mostly not the latter two. But anyway, the idea is that time doesn't just wind down, either for an individual as they age or for a generation, that we're constantly, time is something that is continually being created. And it's being created, co-created by us and the Almighty. It's co-created, but we have a responsibility we cannot abdicate. And I think that this means that the time of the other person for Levinas, what he calls diachrony, comes even before my own. And the Rebbe understood this and used different language to discuss it, but he talked about the time. He used to always say in these responses to people, very often, many of the published ones, you're worried about your own perfection. To someone, a petitioner, even a shliach, would I write to him, he said, worry about what you're there for. You're there for the people who are in your midst. It's not about you. It's about them. So that's a beginning.
Thank
anyway,
you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. From your perspective, after reading this book and digesting it, would you call what's outlined here the Rebbe's social philosophy? Could that term be used?
And I think you'd have to stretch the meaning of the word philosophy a little bit, but it doesn't matter. I think a social vision, which is in the title, is adequate.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
A philosopher is responsible for explaining even the premises on which he stands, and that means the axioms. He does not begin mostly with assumptions that remain unquestioned. And so that is why I think here I wouldn't call it technically consistently a philosophy. And I'm not sure that you want to call Hasidus a philosophy, except in perhaps William James's sense, where everyone has a philosophy of their own, whether they know it or not. And that's not a small thing. But what I say there is a social vision that has been furthered and being articulated in this text, yes. And I think with some degree of precision and subtlety. It varies from section to section, but I particularly like what the author has to say about the individual and the collective. You know, in contemporary America, for example, there's a huge dispute about the limits of individuality, human freedom, responsibility, obligation, and so on. Well, the Rebbe, in Wexler's view, correctly, in my view, not that the Rebbe would have to ask me, but that the Rebbe understood that virtually every society is based on a socio-economic model. At least this is true certainly in the post-war era, on the relation of the individual to the collective. In some cases, the collective dominates. In some cases, individualism dominates. But in a society like our own, or the one in Israel, they're always related one to the other. So that we get into derivative arguments when we start arguing about, do I have the right not to wear a mask? Oh, well, you don't have to, but you know what? That's libertarianism, which the Rebbe did not go for. My freedom is invested as responsibility toward and for others. And even Moshe Rabbeinu wore a mask when he came down, as you know. Okay, stop.
That's a funny joke. In our conversations, you've brought up the concept or idea that how should I phrase this? While the Rebbe was obviously very informed of world matters and political matters, and there's a some famous letters when Carter lost the election, for example. The Rebbe expressed his condolences and still reminded him that on a certain issue, we had a disagreement. Not only did we have a disagreement, but I have a difference of opinion.
Right.
And was unapologetic about his almost apoliticalness. He was very knowledgeable of what was happening throughout the world, but it wasn't by party lines. It was about what was the most important thing for Torah, for Yiddishkeit, for the Jewish people, for humanity. This is something that you brought up. This is the concept that you brought up to me. And
Yes.
I was wondering if you could elucidate a little bit your thoughts on the importance of having that impartial approach.
Well,
I'm asking the question knowing that
Yeah.
you have a background in politics, in Vermont politics, in US politics, and I don't want to have a political discussion. I do want to know your thoughts on the Rebbe's unique approach in this area.
Well, I think one thing the Rabbi, first of all, I think we all understand that the Rabbi appreciated what appeared to be the unique place of America for Jewish people. That while they had been in many lands since the Churban Bayis Sheni, since the destruction of the Second Temple around the year 70, that so far, thank God, there has never been a place that has been more hospitable to Jewish life and to Jewish education. In the case you're talking about with President Carter, it was, if I'm not mistaken, that was the time that Education Day became a kind of national, not exactly a holiday, but it was a day of recognition, recognized as such. The Rebbe advocated.
And it has been since then.
It has been since then. And I
every president
falls out on the Rebbe's Hebrew birthday, Yud Aleph Nisan. Is that correct?
That's right. This year,
and the Rebbe
March
remained.
24th.
Remember, the Rebbe remained appreciative to President Carter for seeing the importance of education. You may know that that every form of leadership and every president has its weaknesses, every regime, but they also may have strengths. Even Herbert Hoover, who helped rescue the previous Rebbe in his coming to America. And the Rebbe was not indifferent to that. So I do think one of the things that Wexler points out was that while the Rebbe, appreciated Ronald Reagan's views on the relation that religion had a primary role to play in American society, although it had to be done in a very subtle way. As we introduced the moment of silence, that Ronald Reagan's privatization of human services and the deprivation of the poor and the oppressed was something that he openly rejected. And I think that has to be acknowledged. I mean, in that sense, there was something about the Rebbe that was inclusive, as we know. And it didn't extend just to poor Jews. You're responsible for your neighbor, and you're responsible for your neighbor's responsibility, which means for his neighbor, which means an entire neighborhood. And that's why that becomes a matter of some very considerable importance. And I don't know, I know that what most people think, we know that I'm going to stay away from the current administration because I have views that are discordant from my fellow Lubavitchers on this, very. And I don't really want to speak about that now because We want to pay attention to Wexler's book. Although I don't think, I think that many of them are much more enthusiastic. Many of the Lubavitchers I know are much more enthusiastic because of what Trump did for Israel and in relation to Iran, which I think was correct, than they are about, as my Rebbetzin once asked at a Torah Masorah convention to a Rav, well, but what are you supposed to tell your children about the president? Enough, my wife said. Okay, that's enough. Mitos. Okay.
What do you think are some of the most important issues of the Rebbe's social vision?
I think one of the most important issues of the Rebbe's social vision, Yisroel Salanter put it, I think, very succinctly. He said, my spiritual needs are the other person's material needs. And that's a quote Levinas cites many times. The Rebbe, contrary to what we sometimes think, was not opposed to Musar. He thought it was the second highest level of education of the inner person. He thought Chassidus superseded that. But at the same time, he was appreciative of it. I say that because Yisroel Salanter was one of the founders of the Musar movement. But I think what the Rebbe understood was that, and this was why, he didn't just, I don't think that his giving things to people, even when they were small things, or the shluchim to share with their communities, like after Pesach, he used to give out a little, a shliach could take a little piece of shmur matzah back to his community. I had one that lasted a long time. Or you could have a l'chaim. Yes, that was significant. It wasn't transubstantiation, but also giving tzedakah. Giving tzedakah was a big, big mitzvah, which he encouraged. When I was a child, the blue boxes for Israel and for Chassid were everywhere. And then after a while, as American Jews became more prosperous and there were all these organizations, that diminished. And the Rebbe brought that back. He brought also not only a sense of time, that we're going toward a better time, a more promising time. I won't say in that sense progressive, but promising, that he also understood that this had to affect where we lived. And while he placed great emphasis upon Eretz Yisrael, he also had a less visible, less vocalized effect on people's homes. What am I saying? Did they not keep kosher before? No, I'm not saying that at all. Did they not light candles before? No, I'm not saying that at all. They not have mezuzahs? No, they did have mezuzahs. He reemphasized those things, but more importantly, he said, and this is quite late, and this is in the late 80s, because he never tired. And his idea was that time was generative, fecund, that it could keep bringing new things and better things. It could build on what was done and not to be content. And he said, every home should be like a Chabad house. Does that mean you had to have everyone in your entire neighborhood for dinner every night? No. But it did mean that you needed to have the basics. You had not only a siddur and not only a chumash, but also svarim that you needed, and that he helped people to arrange calendars for learning. But in addition, he also said that every home needed to have, you had to feel in every home as though you had a place to daven. In every home, you had to have a place that you could welcome people, and you had to. He never said, in my view, every home needs a picture of him, and that I think should not go completely unnoticed. Even though many people and most people do in Lubavitch, which is fine, I do think and he didn't have one in his own study, but he did have sporum on a month that were enough to last beyond a lifetime. And in that sense, he helped to internalize the patterns of the Jewish home. So in space as well as in time, he made contributions. And he also, as you may remember, he insisted, although not everyone listened to him, most people did, not engaging in suburban flight. That was the big change in American Orthodoxy. You know, once you could no longer walk to shul, life was very different. And he wanted people to remain in Crown Heights, as you may remember. And they did, mostly. And he galvanized, rebuilt it, not without great struggle. He also did not approve of what he got regarded as the temptation of consumerism, meaning he said, and I believe Wexler quotes this, so I'm not certain, somebody else might, he was not in favor, he didn't think every home needed a Hollywood type kitchen. And he says that. And he didn't like the idea that there were people who had not even one room and other people who had so many rooms they could take vacations in the house. So I think that's important. He had a sensitivity to the outsider. And by that, I mean, in the Torah sense, the almana, the widow, the ger, the stranger, and the yosem, the orphan. But beyond that, he extended that to the poor too. And and you could see that he himself was not shy about bringing this up as a campaign. And not for himself either, not just for his own groups, but when you went somewhere, he's the one, or at least as far as I'm concerned, who popularized what is a very nice custom, I think, of shliach mitzvah money, of giving someone $1 to give to someone else for tzedakah. And sometimes he would even give you $2, one for you and one for someone else. And I think what it did was to create an atmosphere of community that was beyond the neighborhood.
Thank you. I wanted to go a little bit deeper, if we could, on the concept of making each home a Chabad house.
Yes.
And you said briefly of the 10 different Mifsoim campaigns that, if looking at it through this lens, they're all centered around the home.
Well, many of them did. Tefillin, you want me to talk about some of the other ones you mean?
No, what I wanted to do is just to highlight the importance of the home.
Oh, the home.
The home.
Yeah, I understand your question, I think. Like Levinas, the Rebbe did not regard the home, like Hegel did, as sub-historical, like it is in relation to the marketplace. And you did not have to be a ganze knacker in the marketplace to be unique or important. You were different because you were already unique, not the other way around. Your uniqueness didn't depend on your difference. And in that sense, he understood that in the home, it wasn't just, a man's home is his castle, far from it. The Rebbetzin is the Rav in Daheim. That's what he always...
There's that famous story. It's got a little comical.
You don't learn that, you know what? Life's going to be much more complicated. And he also understood that education began at a very, very early age, even before school. and continued after school, and that the parents had a primary responsibility. And if they didn't know, they should ask, and you should never be embarrassed to ask a question, which was really important. And I think many people are. He did not like the division into Spitz Chabad people and Balai Chuvas. He opposed that. And if someone were to come to him and say, you know, Rabbi, I'm not really a religious person. He said, really? He said, and here I thought you were a descendant of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, right? He made it clear to people that he called them to their own most promise to do what they could. And in the home, a lot of things could happen, that people could be friends with each other. And a lot of that did not have to take place in a shul. It did not have to take place formally in a Chabad house, so that might help. Does Crown Heights have a Chabad house? I'm asking you.
Thousands.
What?
Tens of thousands.
But does it have one called Chabad House of Crown Heights? You have to check on that. Okay, just anyway,
this idea of the responsibility for the next person, for my neighbor, and then by extension the community.
And by extension of that, and this is something you had one of the world's experts speak on, I know, Bill McKibben, who I believe, does he teach at Middlebury? I think he used to. I don't know if he still does. He's one of the world's experts on the environment. And what the Rebbe understood was that and this has to do, I believe, with his concept of time and his concept of fidelity, that we have a covenant not only with those who came before us, but with those who come after this. He often highlighted this in Parshas Nitzavim when he gave a Sikha. And the idea, those of you who are here today, those of you who are not yet here, that we have a responsibility. If we don't, the whole environmental movement makes no sense. It does for our
without the concept of generational responsibility.
Without the concept of generational responsibility, it's just a matter of a style. And you know what? It's not. It's an ethical decision. And he would say an ethical religious decision, I think. And I think that's exactly correct. I mean, you see that because if we don't leave a sustainable environment for others, it's not even clear that some of us, unless we're very, very old, and even then, that we're going to get to see one ourselves, unless we use renewable sources of energy. And the Rebbe talked, as you know, because you're a specialist in this area, at great lengths about sun and solar energy. He didn't say this, but he might as well have. If you could sell shares in the sun, the energy problem would be settled.
Who would you be buying the shares from?
I don't have a cousin in that business, so probably it's better to ask him. He's in California. Anyway, so I'm ready for you. So I know
the extent that it, go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead.
The extent that responsibility extends to my family members, it extends to my community members. But what about the other person that I don't yet know?
It extends to him too, because that is what Nitzavim is about. Those of you who are here and those of you who are not yet here, you are standing. And that was Rosh Hashanah, presumably. And it says, so it includes it includes generations to come. Did Moshe Rabbeinu, he did not get to go into Eretz Yisrael, but he got to glimpse it from a not terribly distant hill. He saw the promise of it. In that sense, that covenant was something that he was part of, even if he didn't visually see the completion of it. And even if we in our own lifetimes have not seen the completion of Am Yisrael, which we're still working on. This is why we're always moving, hopefully mostly forward from Galus to Geula. And the Rebbe
from just to translate some of the ideas from Galus, from exile to Geula, right, for redemption.
Correct. Correct. And this was a major theme that he never gave up on, the theme of redemption. And that is why I think if every person begins in the words of the Gemara there's Rabbi Nachman, not Nachman of Breslov, but Rabbi Nachman, he said, if he's among the living, or discussing who's the Mashiach in Gemara Sanhedrin, in the 90s, near page 100, he said, it's likely me. And the first time I read that, I said, what is he talking? This guy must be off. And then I realized that's not what he was saying. And I had first seen this in an essay on Messianism in the first book of Jewish essays Levinas had written called Difficult Freedom. And then I had a better idea what we understand. What do we mean by that? Everybody disagree. There's a lot of disagreements on Messianism, as you know, but there are a few agreements, beginning with the Rambam. And it has to do with sovereignty. And we know that with respect to Yerushalayim and Eretz Yisrael, we're talking about sovereignty. But there is even a prior kind of sovereignty. I think this is what the Rabbi Nachman from the Gemara was mentioning. That sovereignty is over myself. Over myself. It doesn't mean that I have special privileges. It means that I have should begin to feel as though I have more responsibility than anyone else. Even for you, even for your listeners whom I can't see and don't know. And what does that mean? No. Does that mean that you have to be the Mashiach for me? Does it have to be reciprocal? Here is something that I am not certain that Wexler gets right. I mean, let me put it more accurately, that Levinas would disagree with. He does not say it has to be reciprocal. You got to do it anyway. That doesn't mean you're going to be a nar, a foolish person, and are a masochist. Not at all. What it means is the obligation doesn't lessen, but in a sense, the responsibility, what we mean, ata v'chartana v'chol amim, means that.
Could you translate that, please?
Yes, it means I have chosen you from all the nations.
Thank you.
It means I've chosen you for responsibility for the Torah and through the Torah to all of Israel, and it's put in the singular, and Yisrael. And I'm indebted to Rabbi David Learfield, he should have a refuah shlema from Miami, for that insight. Why? Because each person has to feel that way. And what was the guarantor that the Torah would be given? You know, remember, there's a lot of midrashim on this, one of which says, they first said, well, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov will guarantee it for us. And the Abishur said, no, that's not sufficient. And he said,
the Abishur meaning God Almighty, just God translating Almighty. for those.
Right. God Almighty. And then at the end, we have to go through all kinds of other possibilities. He said, our children were guaranteed. He said, good, well said. And that is also generational responsibility.
So to move back to something that we had spoken about before with Education Day and Moment of Silence.
Yeah.
Seemingly from our discussion that we just had, my responsibility goes out to my community.
Yes.
We see from the Rebbe's social vision that it really went beyond that for the Rebbe, that it didn't stop at the Jewish community, that it extended to the whole world over. That Education Day wasn't, he said, in the Jewish schools, they have times for a moment of silence. It already exists in those curriculums, but it's in the public schools. It's in the schools that aren't teaching morality. that really need this 60 seconds for the children to center their day. As one example, the food stamps program with the Senator Chisholm from Brooklyn is another example.
That's a better example in my view.
Okay, why is that?
You know why? People can figure it out. I think sometimes, a lot of times, whether they're gonna have a moment of silence, but that's important. Do I think that the food stamp program is more important? Oh yes, even the people who are very conservative, who are not so very wealthy, agree that others.
So there's that famous story from
the people have. It's not that people have a right to eat, but we have an obligation as a society to make sure that people do not go hungry, one to the other.
There's that famous story of someone coming to their Rebbe and saying, I don't know that my kavanah, my intention when I was giving the tzedakah was proper. Maybe once I fix that I have the right intention, then I should start giving charity again. And the response was the chicken that the poor person ate, or the dish that the poor person ate, he had the right kavanah when he was eating it. So don't slow down doing the right thing, and just because maybe I didn't have the right thought when I was trying to accomplish
it. Good. Very good. Very good.
So, go ahead.
No, be quiet.
We have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that I give light to other people's questions. Okay, let me just restate. The question came in, let me restate it. The questions going back to some of the progressive nature of the Rebbe's social vision. And it's something that you and I had spoken about in previous conversations. Perhaps you could explain a little bit more what was really so revolutionary in the Jewish world for some of the Rebbe's positions that are spoken about in the social vision.
Well, I want to go back and say, to begin with, I want to emphasize the democratizing of Jewish education and Jewish value. It wasn't as though wealthier people were more valuable because they contributed more to the synagogue. That was very clear. That was always clear. Was that an innovation? I don't know. Probably not. I think, though, he understood that people could take on a mitzvah and not be afraid to be called a hypocrite because they didn't take on all the mitzvahs. That was very important. And one would lead to another. I remember a story that I read about him and Senator Lautenberg, the late Senator Lautenberg from New Jersey, who belonged to a Reformed synagogue. And he said to him, do me a favor, I'm not asking you to, and whom I admired, Senator Lautenberg, he said, join a conservative synagogue. He said, why? He said, who knows, from that something better might come. And he did. And in other words, he didn't expect things of you that he thought were outside of your realm of possibility. What he thought of was something, the best thing was good for you and good for others. Look at his most successful students. I mean, we can see, we all think that, but look at Aiden Steinsaltz, what he accomplished. Unbelievable in his lifetime. Just amazing. I mean, but he encouraged them constantly. He encouraged, I think, people to, the radicalism also extended to a kind of willingness at times to take stands that were not popular. Right before the Persian Gulf War, there was a very well-known Rav in Israel who came out and said, Well, looks like we're headed for another Holocaust for the same reasons as the last one. And I'm thinking to myself, what is this man saying? He's saying because little children didn't grow up in perfectly kosher homes. And the Rebbe who had a long-standing struggle with this man, was rightfully, in my view, incensed. And he said, who is this man who arrogates to himself the position of the knowledge of God from God's point of view? Chas v'sholom. And he never tried to explain the sufferings of others in a way that imposed a kind of superficial rationalizing what other people's sufferings. You want to rationalize your own good, and you want to figure them out good. That was pretty radical. I think also when you went to 770, when he had a farbrengen, I mean, getting a seat, as you may know, was not a small thing, and a lot of tussles and things, but it was, there is no question that, going back to Elliot Wolfson's The Open Secret, that to take wisdom that was viewed as beyond the reach, beyond the accessibility of most people, and to bring it down to earth was a huge, huge thing. That's why it's an open secret. People were given access to it. When I was a child, I don't know too many people who studied Hasidus, to tell you the truth. Certainly not Kabbalah. I mean, and many still don't. But you know what? This was a very innovative thing on his part. Was he understanding also of even the anxieties of the current era of people? Yes, that's why he asked at one time in the very early 80s for people to teach breathing techniques that would lead them to a greater sense of well-being. Aryeh Kaplan, the great American scholar, wrote several books on this subject. And I have a colleague who was in Vermont a couple of weeks ago, Ruth Devora-Wallen, who also practices this, has developed her own techniques specific to Chabad. This is important. You could say, oh, doesn't that mean you're becoming Eastern? No, it means that you discover the breathing, as we say, when the people in Egypt, they said they were out of breath. We understood why.
So you're giving an example of the importance of putting meditation techniques into a Jewish context.
Absolutely.
So that they could be done in a kosher.
You don't have to go off to the Himalayas to understand it.
Okay. One thing that I thought you would mention when you mentioned Senator Lautenberger was that the Rebbe wrote to him famously that if tomorrow you wake up and you're the same as you were the day before, meaning that you have to, each day, you have to try a little bit harder. And the Rebbe
that was more than rhetoric for him, no question. He was doing that for himself until near the very end.
He said that of others. A child once asked, when will Mashiach come? And the Rebbe got very emotional. And he said, when I and your father and you each do a little bit more, we do a little bit better, then we'll be able to help change the world.
Or you can recognize your yes.
Yeah, in your words.
You recognize your messianic responsibility for others. Some people say, well, of course, if you want to go around with a guilt syndrome, then of course you'll feel that way. But that's not what it's about.
No, it's in the positive sense.
It's in a positive sense, and it means that's where freedom becomes meaning and meaningful. And Viktor Frankl says that the Rebbe recommended him. He liked what he had to say. Okay, we know that. He did, the Rebbe's vast knowledge of many things was extraordinary. Do I think he sometimes was overly conservative to emphasize to the scholars around him that he was hardly diluting what was going on? He never said that the world is what, 5,781 years old? He said that about the human being. But in what sense did he mean it? And we don't know exactly. I mean, as I said to you, his claims, if you look very carefully, and I discussed this with Dr. Brower of Montreal about carbon-14 dating, he said, we can't be certain. He doesn't say it's inaccurate, it doesn't work. I never saw him say that. And you have to be very careful what's picked out and what's emphasized. And I think that it's an extraordinary thing that the Chabad goes on in the physical absence of its Rebbe. I mean, it's an amazing thing. I mean, think about it. It shows after the Rebbe had his heart attack, he gave us sikha from his study. He was permitted by his cardiologist. And he spoke on the subject of absence and how there can be a positive kind of absence. Okay. Anybody there have a question, a comment?
Unfortunately, we've run up against the
Rabbi
our allotted time. And Rabbi Telushkin is coming up in a few moments. There was a question that came through about the relationship between the Rebbe's thought and the thought of Levinas, which we covered. There's definitely more to say on it, but we covered that during the talk. And with that, I'm going to have to hand it back over to Jonah.
Well, thank you for
transition
inviting
us to the next talk.
Thank you for inviting me. This will be yes, this is a first for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor.